Thank you. It is working. It is working, isn't it? Can you hear me? Okay. So, welcome back. I see you're glad to be here to the Schemmel Forum's first lecture in the spring semester's World Affairs Luncheon Series, which you notice has been, we've added a lecture now, or 6 lectures this spring semester and in the future. If there's anything that can take away the winter blues, it's this gathering of friends and colleagues to discuss the world with all its complexities, enigmas, and problems. I can't promise that this endeavor will be entertaining. It's not beach reading or summer stock, but I can guarantee you that it will be stimulating, informative, provocative, and energizing. In my view, it not only beats shoveling snow, but even basking in the sun. I realize that might not be a majority opinion. We have a special opportunity today to hear about democracy and the undermining of democracy by corruption and crime. We have the opportunity to hear about peacemaking, its perils, and its promise. Aldo Chirico, as peacemaker and anthropologist, has walked the walk and talked the talk of peacemaking in dangerous places, where angels and other fictional creatures fear to tread. Aldo's good friend and one of my heroes is Leo Luca Orlando, the past and present mayor of Palermo in Sicily, who succeeded in ousting the Mafia and lived to tell the tale. He's back again doing what needs to be done now. I've thought of many times as we have seen corruption creeping pandemically into our institutions, politics, business, religion, education, and more. Aldo learned on the ground in Colombia just what it is like to be in negotiations with very dangerous opponents and live to tell the tale. He will give us some insights into that tale today. And so I ask you to welcome Aldo Chirico.
Good afternoon. I'm very delighted, very excited to be here, and thank you to Sandra for inviting me. As you can hear from my Irish accent, I'm Italian, and a few weeks ago Sandra called me and asked me to come, and I said, "What should I talk about?" And she said, "You should talk about weapons of mass destruction today in democracy, which is corruption." And I was thinking about it, and then it occurred to me that one thing that I observed, since I'm here in the United States, it's now a little bit more than 10 years, when someone doesn't know something about the subject, he or she hires a consultant, pays good money, and gets the knowledge that way, right? Before, when I was in Germany, where I lived for some time too, I saw the Germans do it differently. When they don't know something about, they actually buy all the books, and possibly they take even a degree until they get expert in what they didn't know, right? We Italians, we do it completely different. When we don't know about something, we just go on and give a lecture about, right? So that gives me the confidence of talking about very, very difficult and very challenging issues that are before us. The way I'm going to do it, I thought that one of the realization of having traveled and lived in many different places, that life, more than being a coherent discourse, it's a patch of fragments. And so I said, I'm going to share some fragments of my experience and some thoughts as a way of provoking some thoughts. I hope to share something that is interesting, and maybe then we can have a dialogue where I can go more in depth on things, on questions that you might have. So the first fragment I put the label on rapture. And it has to do with a discover and an encounter that changed completely, if you want, the course of my life. And it happened when I was about 16 years old. I was living in a very small town in northern Italy called Trento, surrounded by the Alps. No major problems, really. Maybe boring because of that. And I turned on the television, and there was a famous journalist interviewing this young man who was just appointed mayor of Palermo. And this guy was bashing against the mafia openly. He was naming corrupt politicians. He was talking against the mafia. He was talking about the mafia, which was unheard of. That the mayor of Palermo, who we in Italy, we all thought that was at least our imaginary, is actually the embodiment of the interests of the mafia, could talk against the mafia. They come to me as a shock. And I started following and seeing what he was doing, and he became very famous because of that. But while I was listening to him talking against the mafia, I said, there are only two options, right? Either this guy is a great hypocrite and a liar, and he's just acting very well, or he's crazy. Because if you are mayor in Palermo, you talk about it, you must have some vocation to be a martyr. I got to know him very well because I work with him, as I will tell you in a moment, and I discovered that he's not a liar. Actually, he has the quality of saying the truth as it is. He's certainly crazy, right? And by crazy, I mean this, we all meet crazy people sometimes on street, and something that actually occurs to me when I meet them is that they are crazy because sometimes they say things very openly that we think and we are not used to say aloud, right? They make observations that are very insightful. And that's really what Leoluca was doing. He was crazy because he was going around and saying the king is naked, right? The reality of our politics is that we are living in a system of corruption, that corruption is endemic. That our prime minister, Giulio Andreotti, who is the embodiment of the politics of Cold War in Italy in those years, was the guarantor of the mafia interest in Sicily. So he was doing something very important, actually, besides attracting the attention of a teenager up in Trento. He was actually breaking a taboo at the time. Because a taboo is a regime of prohibitions. It creates a sense of order, a sense of property, of order, right? A taboo is an open secret, it's knowing what not to know, right? And when you live in an environment which is dominated by the mafia, you know not to talk about the mafia. Actually, they say that the root of the word mafia comes from the Arab and means it doesn't exist, right? So the power of the mafia is that you actually don't talk about the mafia, right? And so Leoluca Orlando understood that if he was starting talking about the mafia, he would diminish the power of the mafia, right? Because secret is what lies actually at the root of power. It's secret, no? So with this silence, that was really, we have a word in Italian where this practice that's omertà, right? Which is the law of silence. Doesn't exist only in Sicily, it exists, now it's a universal almost law. Everywhere there is some power, you don't talk of things that make you uncomfortable. So Leoluca Orlando set out in breaking the paradigm of the law of silence, in telling and making aware everyone, not just in Sicily, but also beyond, that the king is naked. So the first observation, therefore, that I draw from this idea and this attitude just by observing Leoluca Orlando in that interview is that a new political culture, which is necessary in order to create a new narrative, a new discourse, if that narrative and discourse is completely captured by the mafia or mafia-like powers, a new political culture emerges only from an act of rupture. There is no mediation. There is no dialogue. You need actually to break. And for Leoluca Orlando, that was very important because he was coming from an upper-class family, which not his immediate family, but the social class from where he was coming, was actually quite in cahoots with the mafia power, right? He was born. His family is from a town you all heard of, Corleone, right? Which, if you go, it's very small. It's very difficult that you don't meet and you don't know and you don't talk to the mafiosi there, right? It's a small village. His family was landowners, right? And the mafia has a history of coming from control of land. So he had to break all those relationships, right? What did it mean for him? Well, it means that instead of living in the very nice villa his family had in Palermo, where he still lives now with his wife, it's a 1-2-bedroom apartment in a condominium in Palermo, right? It meant that he didn't go to dinner parties in the city in order not to meet anybody who was, to sign the light, to rupture, right? So breaking, actually, this relationship, your roots, is a very important act. Only then you become actually credible, right? When you fight the mafia. So first is the act of rupture. But in order to better understand, I think the importance of a rupture, I would like to tell you a little bit how I came to define the mafia, right? And not just the Sicilian mafia, but the mafia as a power system in general. I think one of the characteristics of the mafia today, and things that I gather also from my own fieldwork and ethnographic work in Colombia and in Mexico, well, it's that it's both global and local, right? It is global because it's a transnational network of crime, right? That is rooted in countries, in cities. It goes across countries, across cities, in neighborhoods and villages. And at the same time, it is very local because it is rooted in the neighborhood. Think of our US city towns here, you know, when I talk about the local gang, right? The Bloods, the Latin Kings, whoever, right? They are part of a larger network that reaches out and down to Latin America, to West Africa, to Sicily, right? Those stories and those people are all connected, but it's also very local. Many of those kids who are parts of gangs actually never get out of their neighborhood, right? They don't even have experience of what is global and what is transnational. And at the same time, the mafia is postmodern, right? Because it's not hierarchical, it's a network, it's ephemeral in many ways, uses the most advanced technology to manage their finances, and at the same time is very archaic. You know, I was very, it impressed me. A few years ago, they arrested in Italy Bernardo Provenzano. He was the head, the boss of the Cosa Nostra. They were looking for him for 40 years, right? They arrested him in his own farm in Corleone, where he was born and lived his entire life, right? But he was giving his order, writing them on small pieces of paper that their messages would bring around, right? No internet, no nothing, very archaic, very, very still in the peasant culture of the beginning of the 19th century in Sicily. So the image that I have of the mafia is actually not like that of a pyramid where you have a boss and then everybody down, but it's more like that of a nervous system, right? A nervous system has a head, which is more important here than my fingers, right? But it's really a combination and a system of a myriad of filaments, of interconnections. And it is in those interconnections, in those nodes of the nervous system that actually the power of the mafia is transmitted and is channeled. So I think the word here that is important in order to understand the mafia is the intertwinement. And who is intertwined? You know, I saw it in Sicily, I saw it in Colombia, I see it in Mexico. There is no mafia without the state, without the support, the alliance of the state and forms of states. It is really in that combination that the mafia takes its power. The mafia is not just what the observable, overt violence, which is certainly what impresses us most, right? It's not the Sopranos we see on TV. That's part of it. That's part of it. I would say the Cosa Nostra, the drug cartels, Los Zetas, they are the army of the mafia, right? The armed forces. But who manages the money? Who elects sympathetic politicians? Who signs the public contracts, right? If there is a system of corruption. Okay? It's a way of doing politics, it's a way of doing economics, it's a way of doing business. So the mafioso Provenzano who was arrested would have not been powerful unless there was a lot of politicians and business people and some detectives and some prosecutors protecting him and being in cahoots with him. This, I think, is important to understand if we want to see how the mafia is actually rooted completely in a territory. You know, if Provenzano lived 40 years in his own village, unable to be arrested, and not because the police is actually corrupt, the police were looking, it's because everybody in the village was actually protecting him, right? Meaning they were not seeing him as a criminal, right? They felt close, they shared somehow his life. So the mafia is rooted into a territory, is made of stories, of attitudes, of feelings, of ideas, of predispositions. And so when it comes to corruption, I think we have to distinguish between two kinds of corruptions if we want to understand what we are up against. One is ordinary corruption, okay? And ordinary corruption is easy to fight because it's an act of crime, and for that, law enforcement and a good prosecutor resolves the problem. It's a bad apple you get rid of. But endemic corruption is a cultural attitude, right? It's a whole system that has that way of working. The mafia is a problem of endemic corruption. Corruption is much more than just some money that you might give to a politician to get a favor. So when you are up against endemic form of corruption, then the police is not sufficient. Because you can arrest someone and then the problem resurfaces with someone else. It just continues because it's a system. When you are within the system, it's very difficult, unless you are crazy like Luca Orlando and you're happy to risk your life. It's very easy that you get involved in that system. It's very difficult to be heroes. I remember I was in this coca growing area of Colombia, and I was having breakfast in a restaurant, and it occurred to me that right a few tables away from me, there was the cartel boss of that area, very famous at the time, having breakfast with his people, and basically holding office hours, right? Like we do in the academic world. And so people were coming and asking favors and so on. And at one point, the commander of the police came with all his police, and it was not to arrest him. It was actually to get order from the mafia. But I just saw it with my, I swear I saw it. I can say I was a witness of that. And I thought of this poor police commander. For a moment, I was actually empathetic with him, because I'm sure he has a wife. I'm sure he had children. In the midst of nowhere, right? Do we want to start doing the hero when you have a mafia boss who is running the whole show? When nobody's actually collaborating, nobody's denouncing because everybody's close. It's very difficult. He should be a hero, right? Since he chose that word. But it's very difficult to be. I don't know if I would have the guts to do it, right? Because it's very easy to get killed or sent away as soon as you get there, right? So that's the endemic corruption system, where it's very difficult to go against the grain. So if you observe, we never talk about the mafia as a noun in itself. It always comes with an adjective, right? It's the Sicilian mafia, it's the Colombian mafia, it's the Mexican mafia, it's the Chinese mafia, the Russian mafia, and so on, right? And one thing that Luca Orlando always told me, and he says in his conference, is, the mafia is a cultural phenomenon because it turns traditional, good, healthy values into satanic verses, right? So in the case of Sicily, friendship, honor, loyalty, those are all good values, family, right? But who becomes the man of honor in a context where the mafia kidnaps your values, right? The man of honor becomes the mafia boss, right? Loyal means to be loyal to the mafia. Family is the organized group, right? So you erode an entire culture by perverting cultural values. And one day I took a trip with Luke Orlando to Colombia, and he was doing this exercise with a group of college students, and was telling his theory about the satanic verses, and then he said, what is the satanic verses of your country? And a student raised his hand and said, it's justice, right? And he was completely right. In Colombia, you have an armed conflict around everybody's interpretation of justice. And in the name of justice, you have narco-trafficking. In the name of justice, you have killings, paramilitaries, guerrillas, and so on, right? That's really what the phenomenon of the mafia is. It's that it becomes a cultural phenomenon. And a cultural phenomenon you cannot fight only with law enforcement. Also because law enforcement arrives always the day after, right? Something happened. So you need to work on the cultural side as well to change the cultural attitude towards a phenomenon. So what Leoluca Orlando did by holding somehow a mirror so that Sicilians could recognize themselves in the mirror and look into the abyss of their own dark side was to say, we have to separate being mafioso with being Sicilian. They cannot become synonymous. And so therefore we have to start saying that whoever is a mafioso has no right and no dignity to be called a Sicilian. And he was doing that with the Sicilians. One of the symbols and logos of the mafia became the so-called Coppola, right? It's a special flat hat that you put on, right? So, for example, Leoluca did a whole campaign to give a new meaning to that signifier of the hat, right? And did a whole campaign to be proud again to wear actually the Coppola as a symbol of being Sicilian, not as a symbol of belonging to the Cosa Nostra. So this is why I said a few minutes ago that of the importance of an act of rupture to create this cultural shift. You know, Foucault has a great small book, a great small book where he analyzes the Greek word parousia, right, which is the free speech, you know. And he uses three characteristics to define the parousia. He says it is about critique, and certainly in Leoluca Orlando it was a deep, radical critique of what was going on in Sicily and Italy at the time. You need courage. You certainly need courage to stand up and go against the grain and be crazy. And then the obligation, which I think the most interesting part, the obligation to say the truth, right, which is a truth that talks to power, which is the king is naked. So the act of rupture is the first very important step without which you cannot hope for a different and new and transformed political culture. And so the second fragment I called truth to power. And I wanted just to share something that for me was very interesting. I was in Palermo, I lived in Palermo, working as a communication director of Leoluca Orlando. He had this great capacity, I think, of giving huge responsibility to very young people, so you had to learn very fast and take shortcuts. But I was down when the Mafia, some of you might remember, with car bombs, killed two very important prosecutors, Giovanni Falcone first and then Paolo Borsellino. They were not just great prosecutors, they were heroes for us Italians. And especially when Paolo Borsellino was killed, people just outpoured on the street. I mean, people could not take it anymore, right? And the outrage, the frustration, the pain was really made public by the citizens. So at the funeral of Paolo Borsellino, I remember I was there in the cathedral, you know, the people even tried to become physical against the president of Italy and the head of the police. And in the evening, a group of us, a group is not like 10, 20, a group of us, probably we were like 200, 250, with Leoluca Orlando, who was not mayor at the time. The mayor was someone linked to the Mafia interests. We assaulted the sort of a preview of the Arab Spring, but we assaulted the palace of the city, right? The city palace. We entered through the windows, right? And we put something so that Leoluca Orlando could be, you know, he's quite heavy, could be lifted and brought into a building, and he appeared on the balcony, right? And it was just a moment, right? It was only symbolic, with occupation by the citizens of a palace of a city. But I found it very interesting, right? The Mafia kills prosecutors. That was 1992, okay, 20 years ago. The Mafia kills with car bombs prosecutor. What is the reaction of the citizens? Is to go to the city palace and occupy it. What is the connection, right? The connection is that the citizens knew exactly, open secret, that that palace was in the hands of the Mafia, and that needed to be freed, right? So the liberation of the public sphere by the primary criminal interest is a very interesting and very important second moment, which means empowering citizenship, right? This is not, you cannot fight endemic corruption or any criminal power just from above. First, because above might be quite corrupt, right? But you need to renew the culture also bottom up. So there is a resistance, if you want, by aware citizens. You know, thinking of that French anthropologist Pierre Classe, right? People against the state, of a certain form of state, of a certain manifestation of power that takes away power from the citizen instead of giving it to them, right? When Leoluca Orlando became, I was down now in June, he was elected again. He didn't want to be elected. And he didn't want to run, really, for office. He told me, because when he came to visit me here like a couple of years ago, he had other plans, legitimate plans. He was mayor already 3 times. He wanted to do something else. But circumstances had him to run again against everybody. No major party supported him, right? No money, because when you run for mayor just 3 weeks before the election, basically there's no even time beside your own bank account and a couple of friends to do anything meaningful. So just using Twitter and Facebook and walking the city. He won, ran off by 70%, right? That means people have good memory, right? So the first thing that he did, and it's something that someone told me that you're going down to Palermo, you will see the doors, the big doors of the city palace are actually open. There is no security, there is no metal detector, right? Everybody can go in because it's the palace of the citizens. So imagine if you for decades have a palace that is closed to the citizens, and the mayor comes and just physically opens the doors. That changes the perception that people have of what politics should be about, right? Those were very important things. So second observation, therefore, is massive action taken by people who are redefining meanings of words, spaces, and symbols. That's the second important thing after the act of rupture. The third fragment, and the last one, is leadership. So I was in Medellin 2003, and someone introduced me to a young, smart mathematician professor who was running for mayor. His name is Sergio Fajardo. Maybe some of you heard of him. And I sit down with him, and I realize, you know, you have a very similar vision and discourse when you look at Orlando. It's very fascinating. And I had the same impression. You know, he was the head of a civic movement. He had no support whatsoever from the traditional powers of the city, no money whatsoever, but momentum, right? I said, you know, this is very, very, very similar to what was going on in Palermo. And so I called Luca and said, listen, here is a guy who really reminds me of you. Why you don't come over, right? As if it would be like coming from New York to Scranton. Why you don't come over and actually have a chat with him, right? Because I really would like you to tell him your story. And Luca is very excited about those things. So he came over from Sicily to Colombia. And they had this meeting. So one of the questions the mayor had, he eventually, Sergio Fajardo, became the mayor, the transformative mayor of Medellin, asked him, you know, what do you do when your public administration is completely corrupt? Right? We're not talking about a few people. Here is the whole system. What do you do as a mayor? Do you fire everyone? Right? And you remain without a machine? And Luca said, it's a question of leadership. When I became mayor, and I remember that actually, I called every employee of the city hall, everyone, from the door, from the front desk to my secretary. And I looked at them in the eyes, hundreds of people, and I said, I trust each one of you. I believe in you. I know you are honest people who are dedicated to public service. I know no one of you is corrupt, and so we can work together. But if only one of you I discover is corrupt, I will take him personally before the prosecutor and have him trialed. Since the mayor was not corrupt, he gave a signal that corruption was no business under his administration. There was no one act of corruption by any official during his tenure as mayor. Same people, same people. He's now mayor, right? I went to his office in June. Who is his, the office of the assistant, the secretary, are the same of the mayor before, who was corrupted with the mafia. They just changed their attitude, right? So for Luca, leadership is about changing, not one person at a time in terms of ideals, but it's changing the environment so that attitudes and behavior change. And that for him is important, that the leader needs to give the signal. One time we were down in Mexico City meeting with the interior minister, the guy in charge of security, and he said, I have a problem with corruption with the police. What would you do? I said, I wouldn't arrest the ordinary police. I would arrest the chief of the police if he's corrupt. Give the signal, no impunity at any level, right? So it's about giving signals and creating the environment. But it's not a leadership for the few and the majority that are followers, right? It's not just the mayor, his cabinet, the bishop, right? It's making it possible, putting everyone in a condition so that the leader that is in you actually has a chance to come out and express himself. Is discover the leadership in you. So for Luca Lombo, it was about making also school children leaders in the classroom. So when he was elected mayor, right, the housemaster of the city palace comes in to introduce himself, right? And he comes a little bit, you know, unkempt, and his shirt was outside, no ties, right? Not very elegant jacket, and he goes to the mayor, Orlando, and says, Mayor, congratulations, I'm your housemaster in charge of maintenance here. Luca Orlando looks at him and says, you were the housemaster, and fired him on the spot. Why? Just because of his demeanor. What is the signal that he wanted to say? You have to have dignity. You have to be a leader in your position, even if you just work at the front desk, right? But you have to honor your job, right? your position, your responsibility, because that will change the attitude of the people. If you are showing up like that at work, how will your workers show up, if they show up at all? You know, there was no sanitation service on the streets of Palermo the day before Luca Ando became mayor. They were just not going out and, right? The day after, Luca Ando only made a statement and said, everybody has to work in my administration or I fire them, right? On the next day, they were out happy to work and to clean the streets, right? When you have an appointment with him, you know, he tells you, come at 11, and then you know that, you know, before 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he's not going to see you. So I always bring books. But I'm an anthropologist, so I like to observe whatever happens, right? It was very fun, actually. So I was there waiting, and they were, how do you call the people staying outside? Like the front desk people. How do you call them? Receptionist? Yeah, the receptionist, right? It was and it was hot, it was humid, right? But so they had their jackets open. But every time they heard the door of the mayor opening, and I liked it, right? Because you could tell that the atmosphere, Luca was just sworn in 2 weeks, had already changed, and people were taking a different attitude towards their responsibility and their work. And I think that this leadership, this idea that leadership doesn't belong to a few and the rest has to follow, but every one of us has to be a leader, is very important for the urban reality in which we live today. 80% of the world population is going to live in urban centers by 2030, according to United Nations. My observation, my theory is that we will have less and less guerrilla groups up the mountains and more organized crime and gangs creating conflict and tensions in our urban areas, where that's where we have to find out how we coexist and how we are going to live together. And I was once making this reflection, this observation to Luca Ando, and he told me, you know, for urban areas, peace building means community building, right? It means creating communities that are self-normative, means community that are these associations of leaders who live for their own territory, who give life to the community and to the territory where they live. And this is the leadership that Luca Ando has in mind. So I think, to conclude, that to fight corruption is about creating this new culture of legality, which doesn't mean that you just observe the law and that everybody is obeying, but it actually you make them do a different experience of the state, of the community. You make and you live the norms that the community gives to itself. You change, therefore, the behaviors, the symbols, the values, the predispositions. You need an act of rupture by talking truth to power with courage. And then you need to empower the people, letting the leader that is in each one of us to come out and have the freedom to express him or herself. But for this, you know, many times I'm asked, you know, what is the recipe, right? It's not about a recipe. It's not about only a few programs that you can have and do. You need a vision and you need an idea. And many times I think that today one of the things that undermines democracy is that we are in this problem-solving kind of paradigm, right? Where everything is about management and not anymore about great ideas. I think that the fight, getting rid of the weapon of mass destruction of corruption, to go back to Sandra's definition, is about having first and foremost a great idea by which then you can live and inspire people to live it together with you. Thank you. Should we open it up to comments, questions?
Why is it that every society, all these different countries develop these mafia type organizations? What is it in human nature that creates this need to follow these kinds of people and do these things that are against their own maybe moral leanings?
Yeah. Should we collect questions or should we?
No, I think take them this way. Yeah.
One-on-one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was trying to gain time. It's no, it's an excellent question, you know, and because it's a difficult one because, you know, if you then put a lens on those territories where this phenomena happen, it's also not true, you know, that everyone ends up being violent and being part of a mafia. It's actually a small group that does big damage. But it's not the majority of the population, right? I'm talking now about the criminal acts, right? So I think every life of this person, right? It's also not just a question of individual psychology or morality, but it's also a clue in a larger reservoir, which is cultural, historical, and social, that allows for those biography to come, right? On one hand, they can constrain, but also enable those kinds of... My observation is that most of the time, those people who join those groups, I think it's also true for... I only know some of the people who are in gangs in Newark, so it's not that I have a huge experience. But when I talk to them, I'm always impressed by how smart they are, by the desire of being someone, by, you know, when it comes to men, it's also a question of masculinity, right? So respect, power. And then you are in the environment you are, and you try to realize those aspirations with whatever is around, right? And if organized crime gives you the best option, if not the only one, to actually become someone, then you just do it, right? So I think the problem is not to work so much on the personal morality. I think it's a question of, you know, seeing it from a public policy perspective more. It is about how do you change those loops in that system, those dynamics of systems that keeping that system constantly in that situation, in a situation of corruption, a situation. So it's not about problem solving, right? It's really about, okay, how can I change the attitude? Where is it? At the same time, I think we don't ask a question which we should ask. You know, it's another thing that I learned from Leluc Orlando. It's not only what's the problem, or who is the troublemaker here, right? Which is what we do many times. If we look at peripheral areas in our city, you know, if you ask the police, they know who the gangs are, the tattoos, and all of that. But we never ask the question, why isn't it worse? You know, it could be worse, right? So why isn't it? What is it that actually allows for that system not to be completely broken, but it's somehow? And if you look at Palermo, so then you start seeing small civic society, civic organization, that pastor which does a fantastic work with the youth, right? That community restaurant which is open and has a $1 menu, as I discovered in Newark, for young people who are poor, so they, you know, hang out in the restaurant instead of on street. So you start seeing things that because people are very creative. You know, most of the time we ask those questions trying to answer from outside those realities. But people who are living in the midst of conflict, they deal with those problems creatively and imaginatively every day. We should just, you know, listen to them. And we will discover lots of good stuff that would come out. It is about strengthening those spaces and systematize them. But I think it's the system, you know, to go back to your question, it's the environment that gives you an input. And if you have certain ambitions and certain tradition, that's also tradition, family. Many times there is a whole generation that goes back. Then that's your option in life to make it. You know.
Isn't there a fairly strong connection between corruption and poverty? And then if the people are giving up then the money that they might collect from these activities, that would be a problem?
You know, it's another great question, because if you really talk to the people who are in the mafia in these neighborhoods, even if you talk to gang people here, they're actually poor. They don't make a lot of money. If they're lucky, they get us almost a middle class kind of lifestyle. So corruption in general makes rich who is already rich. You know, the mafia bosses live in the good neighborhoods of a city. Because they are the one that have a relationship with the politicians, with the banks, with the entrepreneurs, who become entrepreneurs, you know, because through money laundering at one point, they are completely legalized. You know, it's very difficult to say where the money is coming from. So I would say that corruption benefits benefits those who are in control of the power system and therefore are already powerful, but not necessarily. It's a system that prolongs the social and economic inequalities. Doesn't solve it. So maybe the kids join because they hope, they talk about fast money and easy money. It's neither fast nor easy. It's not easy because you can get killed in the process, right? And it's not money that accumulates in terms of becoming wealth. It's money that comes in and goes out and you spend right away. So I think that when we look at corruption, we really need to look at where is the center of power, rather than where does it manifest in terms of violence, in terms of poverty, there is poverty because there is corruption. Not there is corruption because there is poverty, in that sense.
I think my recollection, I had the good fortune to be in Palermo when Leo Orlando was the mayor the first time around, and he gave people the power, the civic power that gave them the ownership of their city, it seems to me. I can remember going to a historic site, and who was the docent who was describing this place to me? It was somebody who was in 4th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say how important that civic power is to people.
Yeah. There was actually one of the most innovative programs that his administration have. They gave, Palermo is a rich city in terms of history and arts, but was also run down when he became mayor. So every school, elementary school and middle school, adopted a monument, right? And so students during the year, in Italy it goes from September to May, they would study the history of that monument, right? But also clean the space, right? And make it accessible to tourists. And then at the end of the year, in May, on weekends, these children who worked on the monument the entire year would serve as guides and told with pride about the monument, the art. And it was a way for Leoluca to give ownership about the public space and the city to the children, right? And start from they always say to him, why do you spend time with children? They don't vote. And he would always say, yes, but they go home and ask their parents, why did you never talk to me about the mafia, right? So he was very strategic also in that. You had a question, right?
Yes, I wanted to ask you if you could give us an update on the negotiations in Colombia.
In Colombia.
Two primary rebel groups, and if you're hopeful that they will ever be successful in laying down their arms.
Yeah. So in Colombia, just briefly, in Colombia you have an armed conflict going on now for about 50 years. Different peace processes were attempted, some to good fruition, and some guerrilla group, especially at the end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s, demobilized and reintegrated. But the two historical groups, the FARC and the ELN, never did that. And now, with since for a year now, there has been talks and conversation between the Colombian government and the FARC guerrilla. I am, and we are going on right now. We are in a moment of recession, but it's an ongoing moment in Cuba. Personally, I've been involved in the previous one with the ELN as a facilitator of ceasefire negotiations, which gave me somehow an insight of how the government works and also how the guerrilla works and thinks about these peace processes. I define them in this stage as a continuation of war by other means, rather than, being... Peace is somehow, for us, sometimes romantic, and we think it's a conversion to nonviolence, right? No, it's, for that group at this stage, is still doing politics, just in a different way, trying to reach the same objective by talking instead of by shooting each other, which is already something nice. I have the idea that this time we can be, with prudence, but we can be optimistic, because of how the process was designed, because of the kind of people who are involved on the government side. It's a team effort that involves, for the first time in the history of Colombia, actually also the design and the thinking process of the military, which I think in the case of Colombia is very important. But also on behalf of the FARC. The leadership changed over the years. It's a much urban leadership who is probably more eager to do active politics or see themselves more in a political terms than just peasants fighting. And so and just the international context as well. It's just anti-historical that you still have romantic guerrillas, with Che Guevara and up in the mountains. So I'm hopeful that because of history, because of the moments, and because of who is involved, we can be... There are sectors that are still very opposing it, but I think it's a healthy debate, actually, going on in Colombia. So I hope that by November, like we promised, we might have a peace agreement. It would be a historic.
I think you might know this. The United States, they're holding the arrested, he's been in prison, the former foreign minister of the FARC. And the FARC
Simon Trinidad.
Yeah, the FARC wants him
Yeah.
to be released or to be allowed to
Yeah.
get involved
Yeah.
in the negotiations. And I guess my question is, do you think that, the United States should do that? And do you think the United States should become more directly involved in
Yeah.
these negotiations?
Yeah, you're referring to this famous Simon Trinidad, who is quite a mind, actually, of the FARC. I think the response of the U.S. government to the FARC request to have Simon Trinidad officially as part of a negotiation table was nice try, right? I mean, good for you that you tried. We're not going to release him. I don't see any reason from a national interest of the United States at this point in time in the negotiation, which are still starting, still beginning. We have no assurance that we are going to end up in a positive way. I don't see, seen from Washington, the interest in risking something like that politically more than in any other terms, or being generous at this moment when we are not really sure what the FARC is up to 100%. I do think that the US will be open and available of giving Simon Trinidad back to Colombia once there is a peace agreement. I think that's somehow probably that in a concrete way the US is willing to do and to negotiate as its own contribution to the good end of the peace process, but not at this point in time. In terms of the direct involvement of the US, you're right. I think the US is holding a hands-off kind of approach right now from the peace process for a variety of reasons. One reason being, I think, that they are confident that President Santos knows what he's doing. At the same time, seeing it also as a very ambitious effort. And so I think the US got burned with President Pastrana and the Caguan process, the previous one 10 years ago, where President Clinton was, at the beginning, the first 2 years of the peace process, was absolutely backing it publicly, and they got burnt with that a little bit because it fell apart. So I don't think they want to repeat that mistake. So I think the attitude of the US right now, it's hands-on. If the government of Colombia asks for any assistance, we are happy to give it, but we are not leading it. We are not getting involved. I do think that in a post-conflict, post-agreement phase, the US will play a very important role, especially in terms of social and economic development They have, they have given a great support militarily, which certainly made a huge impact on the strategy, the military strategy that the Colombian army used. They are now so well trained that the U.S. is actually using them in Central America against narco-trafficking and gangs there. But I think it's actually wise on behalf of the U.S. to have a hands-on approach.
One final follow-up question. Why do you think the negotiations are taking place in Havana, and what role has Hugo Chavez, the president of Venezuela, played in this?
Chavez played a very important and this time constructive role. Because he was able to talk to make the guerrilla leadership confident that the time had come to sit down with the Colombian government. My speculation, for a few rumors and a few news I have, is that he did it also because he was already aware of his sickness and that might be somehow the end of his life. And that he somehow wanted, felt personally that he had to do something positive for Colombia, and that someone told him that's really the thing that you can do is to talk to the guerrilla and tell them, because the leadership was in Venezuela. That's a public secret, and he was effective in that. So I think Chavez played a very important role in making the guerrilla confident. So he played really a facilitated role, but this time, behind the scenes and not doing a show like during the Uribe government. The second, what was the second? Oh, why Cuba? I think for a series of logistical reasons. At the end of the day, both the FARC and the Colombian government trust the Cuban government, which is known for its correctness in terms of diplomacy. Right? I give you an example. When the ELN negotiators got to Cuba without negotiating and agreeing it with the Colombian government, the Cubans sent them back to Venezuela, right? So the Cubans have this capacity that they hold their words and they guarantee whatever is agreed with them that they will follow through. So I think that gives the confidence to the guerrilla to get out of the country and get to Cuba and be there safe, and to the Colombia government to do it in a space that is acceptable. There were other places in discussion like Norway, but at the end of the day, Cuba was geographically and Cuba has experience in that, so I think it's playing a good role.
Two questions. One, what has been the impact of Leo Luca's success in other municipalities in Sicily and Greater Italy? And second, does he have any interest in higher public office?
Yeah, that's why he didn't want to be mayor again. He was hoping to be minister once Berlusconi was. We hoped he was history. I still hope his history. I think Luca had a huge influence. If you look at the mayor of Naples, which is another major city that has a mafia problem, is a former prosecutor who is takes mentorship from Luca Orlando. A lot of mayors in Sicily or political leaders, also some of the senators today, are people who grew up with him. So I think that. And beyond Sicily and beyond Italy, he was called by, I don't think it's a secret, but he was called by the president of Mexico when he was finally confirmed in September, and consulted him on how to do, what is his experience and advice on dealing with organized crime in Mexico. We are flying back again to Colombia together to Medellin in June, because he wants to. The governor there, who put cultural legality as the first pillar of his development program, wants to hear from Leluca and get his advice. So he became a paradigm that is followed. Even if they don't know him personally, there is now enough material that people actually take that culture of legality framework as a methodology of governance. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
think that I hope that we have been infected somewhat by this culture of legality. We see a lot of corruption around us in the world, in institutions of all sorts. So let's leave here, not this minute, but let's leave here with that, some of that infused in our minds and hearts. For Schemmel is collaborating with the Friends of the Library in an event this evening at 5:30. Sally Wiener-Grada will be showing her photographs of American hands at the library, and we hope some of you will come. 5:30, she'll be speaking at about 6, and there'll be refreshments afterwards. And this is the beginning of our series of luncheons, and there'll be another one in about 2 weeks. So please tell your friends to come back, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.